What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome to today's podcast. Today, we are joined by Kane Kalas. For those of you guys who don't know Kane, he's an ex-poker player, upswing poker coach, and now hedge fund manager. A lot to talk about with him. We're going to talk about the economy. We're going to talk about cryptocurrency. We're going to talk about DeFi. And we have a couple sports bets that we're going to talk about as well. If you're a fan of the NFL, that should be great too. But before we jump into that today, I want to quickly let everyone know about today's sponsor, CoinFLEX. Today's podcast is brought to you by CoinFLEX. CoinFLEX is a cryptocurrency derivatives exchange and is the home of crypto yield for people to both trade and earn crypto. The CoinFLEX platform provides an array of products that serve investors and traders of all skill levels, from passive beginners to active experts. What I'm most excited about with our new partnership with CoinFLEX is exploring the many opportunities that people can use to make money today. Whether it's trading, automated market making, or simply holding flexUSD, there are so many ways to explore earning money now. CoinFLEX can help you make the most from crypto, allowing you an opportunity to take charge and chart your own course to your financial destiny. So what are you waiting for? Head on over and check out CoinFLEX at www.coinflex.com. Legal disclaimer: none of the information contained here constitutes an offer to buy or sell any currency, product, or financial instrument, to make any investment, or to participate in any particular trading strategy. All right, now bring in our guest today, Kane. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
This is a podcast I've wanted to do for some time. I've known you for a very long time in the poker streets. I think actually in poker, we always kind of rolled in different areas. I think I was more of the online heads up type games. I think you were a little bit more of the live games, and you actually played a lot of Six Max sort of before I came up. But obviously you've been a very successful poker player who's managed to transition into other areas, and it's going to be great to catch up today.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually started playing heads up exclusively in my poker career, but I was, a pretty big game selector. So you and I probably didn't play each other very much, maybe a couple hundred hands before I would quit.
I'll take a compliment where I can get it. Yeah, I don't think we actually played in too many games. The only games that I can think of that we played together in were a little bit on Poker Night in America. We ended up in some of the same lineups. Other than that, I don't think we've actually played very much.
Live at the bike as well once, I think.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. So what are you up to nowadays? Where are you based out of? What's your story?
So in 2018, I moved to Puerto Rico, started to concentrate on investing rather than poker, with cryptocurrency as well as traditional equities. And then I launched a hedge fund about a year and a half ago because it was going very well. And so now that obviously takes up most of my time, but I still try to play poker when I can. I went to the World Series of Poker this year and managed to play about half as many events as I would have liked to, about 12 events or so. And I'll be doing that probably forever at the World Series of Poker, but poker's taking up less of my time these days, and investing in finance is taking up more of it.
It's an interesting pivot, and it's one I see a lot of poker players take to get into more finance and crypto markets. But I don't see too many people that are running hedge funds because, frankly, it's a lot of work, and there are a lot of regulatory hurdles that you have to overcome, and you really have to have your shit together. What's it been like exploring that space, coming over from a lot more lenient and sort of chill background in poker?
Yeah, it's interesting because until you really grow your fund, right, it can be kind of a money pit. Because right now, Crystal Oak Capital is a year and a half old. We're doing well in terms of assets under management, but we're not doing so well that this is that the fees that I make from the fund is substantial at all to my income. 98% of my income comes from my own personal capital that I'm trading, right? So it's interesting. I'm spending so much time kind of building this fund where it's almost in the end, it's costing me money. But I've always loved making people money, something that I when I was playing poker for a living early on, in my first year of playing poker professionally, I had already made it to be playing Rail Heaven in Guy Laliberté games, right? And one of my favorite things was just to sell action like 10 different people, make them happy, and make people a lot of money. And I kind of did that consistently throughout my poker career. So it's something I've always loved, is giving people the opportunity to get exposure to whatever sort of expertise I might have to earn the money. And right now, that's definitely in the equities markets and as well as in the crypto markets.
It's a great feeling to make people money, especially when they're your friends or people that you're close with. I would way rather lose my own money than lose someone else's that I consider to be a close friend, because it just feels bad. Your money, you think, whatever. I knew the edge here, it's fine. But having to relay the bad news to someone is never fun.
Yeah, exactly.
As far as the fund goes, you say that most of your money you're making here is because it's your own capital that you're trading. The idea, though, really is that as you scale, that's not going to be the case, right? I mean, maybe today you're losing money because of that, but long run you won't. And as a kind of an example, with Upswing and YouTube, with a lot of my YouTube content that I made out of the gate, in fact, if you look at how much I've made on YouTube in my career, I'm definitely in the red when you compare the amount I've spent on staff and people working on my channel compared to the amount I've been paid from YouTube. But I'm certainly not in the red because it's allowed me to promote my businesses. Upswing has made a bunch of money back that way, and other things that I'm doing. Obviously, I'm able to get sponsors and things like that. So it might be one of those things you're in the red today, but long run, your goal is obviously to make money.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I hope that the fund grows and that it's able to make money. I think it's a little bit of a different situation than yours because you kind of have that cross marketing, right? Where your YouTube channel is driving traffic to Upswing Poker. For me, it's like, as long as I'm a good fucking investor, then I'm going to do really well with my own capital. And, the fact that my business grows or doesn't grow, that's not really going to affect my own investing and my own capital, right? So the business aspect of it, launching a hedge fund is just kind of to give people exposure to the same trading that I'm doing. And to the extent that I grow that to be a large fund, right now we have 5 million under management, which isn't bad. Outside of the GP's contributed fund, we have about 5 million under management, which isn't bad for a year and a half, right? But it's still not at the point where I'm making substantial money from the fund itself, right? But the idea is that as you get more assets under management, the fund grows, then I could make money from there. But to be honest with you, if it would be great if I really grew the fund to be very large, such that I was making substantial money from that. But I anticipate that for a long time into the future, a large percentage of what I make will come from my own personal capital and how I do, trading that. And I think that makes sense. And it kind of gives investors, a little bit of confidence, in that I'm not doing this in order to try to generate fees from people, right? I'm doing this because I think that I'm a very good investor, and that's in fact what I'm doing. These same strategies are what I'm doing with most of my money, and that's where I'm making most of my money, actually, from the trading itself, rather than a lot of people in finance are just kind of in it to what you're kind of taught is to don't do too much better than the market, don't do too much worse than the market, create some cookie cutter type of portfolio, and so that way you don't really lose any money, and you just kind of generate fees over time. That's definitely not the business that I'm in, and it's definitely not, hedge funds are a little bit different in that way than traditional. If you work with a traditional broker, or certainly if you have access to a mutual fund, you're going to get more of those kind of cookie cutter strategies. Whereas, when you go in the hedge fund route, you tend to get some more aggressive strategies, and that's why the bar is higher for an investor to invest in a hedge fund, right, than to simply invest with their Bank of America or TD Ameritrade broker.
Those traditional cookie cutter type of strategies, I think, are falling more and more by the wayside because it's becoming increasingly easy for investors to pick out their own portfolios and strategies, especially because a lot of the online trading platforms now are free of fees, so you don't have to worry about paying money on your transactions. And then additionally, you can cut out the middleman and not have to pay some financial advisor in order to make your trades. Financial advisors have always really bothered me. I'm not saying that there can't be a place for them. Certainly, when people inherit large amounts of wealth and they don't know what they're doing, I think that they can have a great role there. And for people that are very, very new to investing and don't understand basic stuff, that can be fine as well. But the reality is, I think the vast majority of people are far better off investing their own money and picking out their own strategy, because you can do so quite easily than you are to end up in one of these traditional type of cookie cutter strats where someone is essentially just trying to match the market and then pocket their carry.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely true for your audience. For the average person, it becomes a little closer, and it's just because people tend to make very irrational decisions when their own money is on the line, right? So you see this thing where, when there's a crash in equities, people are selling, and when they're at all-time highs, people are buying, and they're just kind of doing the opposite of what they should do, right? So, but I agree with your general premise. And in fact, to piggyback on that, Crystal Oak Digital Assets, my crypto fund, we were in the business of doing some arbitrage trade involving Grayscale, where basically, Grayscale is a trust that owns Bitcoin and issued shares. And before the Bitcoin ETF, right, Grayscale was the only way to really get exposure to Bitcoin. And so, but these shares were trading at a premium to net asset value. So, for example, if Grayscale held, let's call it $5 billion worth of Bitcoin, the shares were trading as though they were holding $8 billion worth of Bitcoin, right? They were trading at a pretty substantial premium. And meanwhile, so our side of the trade here is basically to try to short these shares, right? But meanwhile, I know financial advisors who are friends and actually family members who are advising their clients, oh, you want to get exposure to Bitcoin? Let's get you some shares of this Grayscale. Meanwhile, they're paying a 60% markup essentially for their Bitcoin, right? So that's just to tell you, financial advisors don't do too much due diligence. They kind of have like cookie cutter, you're run-of-the-mill financial advisor, right? They have these cookie cutter kind of products that they're pushing out on their clients. And, kind of like you said, they're not going to, in general, they're not going to do too much better or too much worse than indices that you could invest in yourself, right? You could just get in there, buy the NASDAQ, buy the S&P 500 without paying those fees, right? So if you have the ability to just open up an account with Interactive Brokers, buy the S&P 500, SPY, and then just sit there and never touch it. If you can do that, then you're probably going to do better net of fees than your average financial advisor. I mean, the S&P 500 is up, 24% in 2021. Historically, it's up 7.4, 7.5%. So,
and I would imagine, given the state of inflation, we're going to see the average rate of return increase. And when you have to think about your expenses and your fees that you're paying, if someone is earning fees as a percentage of your performance, then those actually increase too. So something else to kind of be thinking about when we're considering fees and inflation and all those kinds of things. All right, internet, you're good?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. It just froze for a little bit there.
Oh, okay.
Going back to talking about GBTC, because you were talking about the Grayscale BTC fund. Isn't that trading at a discount today?
And it is, yeah.
How? Because I think for quite some time it's been trading at a discount. I sort of tuned out of the markets for a year or two and then plugged back in earlier this year, late last year. And from what I remember, it's been trading at a discount for maybe that entire time. What happened where it went from trading at a premium to trading at a discount?
So these shares traded at a premium for years, right? And when we say premium, we're talking about a premium to net asset value. In other words, if you take the total value of the Bitcoin that was owned by Grayscale, right, and then you take the value of their total shares outstanding, right? The value of their total shares outstanding was greater, substantially greater than the total value of the Bitcoin that they owned, right? That means that something's trading at a premium to NAV, right? And for years, it was trading at a premium to NAV, and the reason was because it was basically the only gig in town, right? If you wanted access to Bitcoin, other than owning the physical Bitcoin itself, right? You wanted access to Bitcoin in your retirement account or otherwise in your brokerage account, right? And a reason why you'd want that rather than owning the Bitcoin yourself is, one, you can't own physical Bitcoin in a retirement account, right? But outside of that, institutions, right? There's different compliance when you're an institution, you actually own physical cryptocurrency. And a lot of institutions didn't want to go through that, right? So instead they said, okay, I'll just buy GBTC, right? Without even maybe realizing that they were paying a huge markup to own this thing. And as you pointed out, today it's trading at a discount, which means that all of the Bitcoin owned by Grayscale, right, is worth more than their total shares outstanding. So it's gone from trading at a huge premium to trading at a discount. And that's kind of, what I anticipated. And the reason for that is because now there are competitors to Grayscale. You can get your access to Bitcoin by owning a Bitcoin ETF, right? Which you couldn't for a long time before. Now, my recommendation is if you want exposure to Bitcoin, right, you're just looking to long Bitcoin, I would own neither shares of Grayscale nor the Bitcoin ETF, right? The reason I wouldn't own shares of Grayscale is because we don't really know where that discount is going to land, right? Like right now, it might be a little bit attractive to own shares of Grayscale because you're like, well, I'm getting Bitcoin at a discount. But meanwhile, you're paying an annual fee, which I believe is 2% still. So basically, they take a 2% annual management fee, right? And for that reason, every year in perpetuity, your shares are getting diluted by 2%, right? So if you're going to own Bitcoin for the next 10 years, you're talking about 20% dilution, right? And I also wouldn't own the Bitcoin ETF. And the reason there, it's a little more complicated, but with these commodity ETFs, we see something called contango, and they just always underperform, or not always, but almost always underperform the underlying asset, right? And so this is true of basically all commodity ETFs. It's much better to own the underlying asset than the commodity ETF. The thing is, with something like soybeans or corn or oil, it's a lot more difficult to store and own these things. With Bitcoin, it's real easy. Just get yourself a ledger, get yourself a Trezor, have the Bitcoin there instead of having the Bitcoin ETF.
I would push back on that a little bit because it's easy for people that are younger and are tech savvy and understand Bitcoin. But for older people or people that aren't as familiar with using computers or don't understand a lot of these types of things, I see it end in complete disaster all the time. And so when you say, okay, the 2% fee is going to be bad for you over time, of course, and it will underperform just holding the native asset. For people that aren't able to do this securely themselves, maybe it can make sense for them to hold an asset like that. And then additionally, you talked about the IRA factor, that when you have money in an IRA, you can't simply just buy Bitcoin with it. I was in that exact spot earlier this year, well, actually for the last several years. And my strategy with my IRA has been, it's pre-tax. So I try to gamble as hard as I possibly can in my IRA account, which is ridiculous, by the way, that the system is like that. Let's take the pre-tax money and put that in the retirement account so you can gamble hard. Because if you lose it, you never pay tax. And if you gain, then you get more gains than you would have anyway. So it's basically the best spot to take high risk positions. So for example, I think earlier this year, I had about $1 million in my IRA, and I had 500K or so in Riot and 500K or so in GBTC. Not because I was trying to make a statement on GBTC versus holding the native token of Bitcoin. Obviously, I would prefer to hold the native token of Bitcoin, but rather because it's GBTC versus something like VTSAX or QQQ or total market funds. And I liked the prospect of buying Bitcoin at certain points. And I traded a little bit when things tanked. When things went up a lot, I bought some total market funds. And then when they tank, I bought some more GBTC or Riot. But what do you think about that as a retirement account strategy?
Yeah, you're doing it the right way, right? And a lot of people don't. A lot of people, the general advice is in your retirement account, you want to own things that you're going to want to own for years, right? And that makes sense if you're thinking about it in terms of, okay, what's going to set me up for retirement? But if you think about it in terms of EV, right, that actually makes almost no sense because you have no capital gains tax on your retirement account until you cash it out. That's long-term or short-term capital gains. So if anything, if you're in the United States, right, and you're paying regular short-term and long-term capital gains taxes, right, then in your retirement account, you want to own whatever asset that you might want to dump next month or in 2 months, right? Because you avert those short-term capital gains taxes, right? And likewise, you also want to own the assets that are going, to the moon or bust, right? Because those taxes are deferred. You don't need to worry about that if you come on out to Puerto Rico. The water's warm out there, which is where I've been since 2018. So
very nice. And I want to talk about that in one sec, but one last thing about the IRA strategies. And I had some unbelievably sick swings because when I had Riot before, I forget what the price was, 15, 20, 25, $30. It went down to 60 cents the summer of last year. And I think I had 25,000 shares or something like that. So almost a total loss. And then it went from 60 cents up to $70, $75 at the absolute peak. And I had just held. So I had a ton of money from that then. And then I held after that and it went down to 20 or something. So I've had some really incredible swings in my IRA account, which again, definitely not what they were planning on having happen, but I think is the optimal EV play.
That's funny. That's now you're newly married, right?
Newly married, yeah. Got married a couple months
Congratulations.
ago.
Yeah. Is your wife worried at all about your retirement account, fluctuating so much, needing to maybe support you in the future, with you just gambling on Riot over there in your retirement account?
I don't know, but if she is, she doesn't tell me. So that's good. I'm sure
Your
trusts
friend Jason's over. He's over at Riot, right? He's the CEO. Is that
Yeah,
right?
Jason Les is the CEO. He came on this podcast a couple months ago.
Oh, nice. Okay. And then I know that John O'Rourke, UMD Tennis, used to be the CEO.
He did. I'm not as close with John. I've met him a couple of times.
Yeah.
But he
actually
CEO before.
just moved to Dorado in Puerto Rico.
Oh, okay, cool. So talk to me about this Puerto Rico move. You're originally from Philadelphia,
Philly.
I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, Philadelphia. Why did you decide to move down to Puerto Rico?
So first of all, the weather's obviously amazing out there. 365 days a year. The temperature is between 60 and 93. I mean, it just stays in that range, right? Which is perfect. Now, about 3 months out of the year, you do get rainy season, so you can't do everything you necessarily want to do, and that's right about now. It's ending. So that's number one. But number two is the taxes. Puerto Rico is one of the only places on planet Earth that, as a U.S. passport holder, you can live and pay 0% federal capital gains taxes, right? The only other places are other U.S. territories, British Virgin Islands, Guam, right? And the reason why there is this kind of exception is because back in the day, Puerto Rico and the other U.S. territories were requiring a lot of government aid. And the government basically, the federal government said, well, what are we going to do? Are we just going to give these territories more and more aid every year? Or are we going to come up with some sort of plan? And the plan they came up with was, we're going to incentivize wealthy individuals to move to these territories, bringing their capital to invest in the local economy. And then we don't need to perpetually increase the aid that we're paying, right? And as a result, a lot of wealthy people, specifically in finance, right, have moved to Puerto Rico because people like me, we make our living on capital gains, and I'm in being in Puerto Rico, I'm effectively able to pay 0% on my personal capital gains, and then in terms of Crystal Oak Capital, right, my hedge fund, I pay 0% on carried interest, and for my management fee, I pay a flat 4% on that. So if you own a company in Puerto Rico that's based in Puerto Rico that exports services, right? So I'm exporting financial services. There are other people who export accounting services or legal services, right? You pay 4% flat tax on those export services. So there are two things here: 0% federal capital gains, and that includes long and short term, right? Which is huge for traders, right? And 4% on export services if you live in Puerto Rico.
So what kind of property listings are available in your neighborhood? Because I think that my 2022 just opened up nicely.
Well, I hear you just moved, aren't you? You're still moving things into your Austin place, I hear.
Yeah, I just moved to Austin, so I'm not planning on leaving the country. When I first heard about the Puerto Rico tax break, it did seem very attractive, but I really like being in the suburbs of bigger cities. I just think that the lifestyle you get is so good. You can kind of tap into the urban advantages when you want, but you still get to live in the nice, spacious suburbs. And when you're looking at the biggest cities in the U.S., they tend to be very nice suburbs where you can get a great place to live. So Austin was my pick, and no state income tax is something. It's not 0% federal on capital gains, but it still is quite a reasonable rate compared to living in somewhere like a California or in Illinois or New York.
I mean, you had that in Nevada as well.
Nevada is how we say it, Ken.
Yeah. Austin's a great city, though. I was just there for a wedding. If I would live somewhere else, it would probably be either Austin or maybe Vegas as well. I think you've lived in two of the places that I would choose to live if I weren't in Puerto Rico. Are you liking it there?
Yeah, it's great. The barbecue's awesome. Although I had an unfortunate incident a couple months ago where I got food poisoning eating a beef rib. It was unfortunate. And you want to know how good Timex runs? He went to dinner with us and he just had the brisket. Of course.
No
Of
problem.
course. Yeah, I should just eat whatever
Yeah.
whatever Timex got. I'll have that. I'm sure it'll be great.
He doesn't live in Austin, does he?
No, he just came to visit for a little bit.
Yeah.
But the food's great.
Have you waited in line at Franklin yet?
You can't eat inside of Franklin's anymore.
COVID stuff.
So for those of you that don't know, in the Austin barbecue scene, the two probably most well-known spots are Franklin's and Terry Black's. And Franklin's is constantly rated right around the top. But when COVID happened, they went to pickup only. And then when it got back to you could go into eat places, they looked at their business, I think, and they just realized they were making more money doing pickup only because they can just do higher volume. So they just scrapped the restaurant part of it. It's all pickup only. I went there with Caitlin and we showed up, we're ready to eat, and then there's a line of cars and they said we can't go inside. Yeah, it was unfortunate.
Jeez. So did he wait in line and pick up at least, or?
No, I didn't. We took an Uber.
No.
We didn't even have a. Yeah, it was just.
Oh, forget about it.
Total.
So you still,
one day.
So you still haven't tried. You still haven't tried it, huh?
Is it good? Do I need to try it?
It's the best barbecue I've ever had. But I waited in line 3.5 hours to get it. Yeah. I like Terry Black's a lot. The thing I like about Terry Black's is you show up, you park, you walk inside, and you're eating in 10 minutes, right? Franklin, you're going to have a much different experience, but the barbecue itself was better.
Okay. I'll have to do that. I'll have to check it out. But yeah, anyway, so the tax situation's good. The food's good. The weather's awesome. I really enjoy that. The lifestyle is good. I got a super overpriced house, so that's nice. Not that great. It's good though. It's good. I like Austin a lot. It was ready.
You have a dog? It's a big dog city.
I've got 2 large rats.
Okay.
They're technically dogs, but they're 5 and 8 pounds, so they're not gonna. We can't even leave them outside, man. The coyotes will get them. We got to make sure they're on the short leash.
Oh wow.
So how long have you been in Puerto Rico for?
Moved out there in 2018.
A few years now.
Yeah.
Are there nice areas? I assume so, right?
So, nice-ish. It's not nice by U.S. mainland standards, right? I mean, some of the things that aren't as nice, right, is you'll see the roads are really bad. Potholes everywhere. I've been there now, 4 years, and I've gotten maybe 8 flat tires since I've been there. So, I mean, yeah, the pothole situation is bad. There's also graffiti, probably worse, pollution than most places in the United States, right? So definitely not as nice as a pristine city in the mainland United States. But then people ask me about what about crime, what about violence, stuff like that. There is gang-related crime in Puerto Rico, but there's not too much petty crime, and there's not too much like crime related to tourists or crime outside of that, right? It's different than some other Caribbean places like, Jamaica, or I lived in Costa Rica for a little bit, and there was a lot of crime targeted at gringos like myself who moved there, just kind of, petty theft and robbery. That's not as common in Puerto Rico, fortunately. So there actually isn't any part of Puerto Rico, I think, that has as bad crime as like some of the worst parts of Philly. So yeah, that's encouraging. Obviously we spoke on the weather. The food is a problem for me. If you go to the really high end spots, you can get some good food, right? But you don't want to be spending, necessarily every night an hour and a half dining in order to get good food, right? So I enjoy fast food. I enjoy cooking, right? Both of those things are a little bit of a problem in Puerto Rico. If you go to the supermarket and you go to pick up eggs, right? Like most of the eggs there will be expired, right? And this is just kind of island living in general. I wouldn't say that this is isolated to Puerto Rico, but any island I've ever lived on or been on, right? The quality of the products there, the food and produce, it's just not going to be as high quality.
Totally agree. And I just got back from several weeks on islands. I actually think Maui has pretty good food, but we went to Bora Bora, and Bora Bora beautiful, but the food was just really, really poor. Even in nice hotel resorts, just not high. The preparation I think was actually pretty good, but the food quality wasn't very good. And I think part of that is just being in the middle of nowhere. Not Not that Puerto Rico's in the middle of nowhere by comparison, but yeah, island living, I think it makes sense that it is like that. So those are your but 0% federal capital gains tax. So trade-offs.
Yeah. 0% federal capital gains, expired eggs. Pick your poison.
I've never liked eggs that much, Kane.
All right. Well, listen, I know you've been farming over there. The water's warm out in Puerto Rico. Also, that's the other thing is if you're in the crypto space, right, there's probably not a more vibrant community of crypto people per square foot than out in Puerto Rico, right? I mean, you could find some cities where there's more stuff going on in crypto, right? But that's cities with much higher populations. Come on out to Puerto Rico and you're going to find a lot of people in the crypto space of all shapes and sizes, right? You're going to find a lot of hodlers, right? And just investors and people who believe in certain coins, but you're also going to find people who are really into the technical side. You're going to find people who run crypto conferences around the world, right? So it definitely has become a hub for the crypto space. Actually, in December, they just did like a week-long, crypto sort of event where they did all sorts of different events in the crypto space. Brock Pierce was one of the early guys to move out to Puerto Rico in the crypto space. So it's definitely a lot of people in digital assets out there. And what's funny is when they first started coming down there, this was like right before I got there in 2018. Like, we're laying our claim here. We're going to make Puerto Rico the freest place in the country, and we're going to call it Cryptopia. And so Brock and the guys who moved out there called it, but yeah, that means something else in Spanish, and they learn very quickly it has to do with homosexuality, and and they're
Nice.
like, you know what, we're gonna think about that and maybe amend the name.
Reasonable change. It also seems a little bit too idealistic to try and call it Cryptopia.
Right, yeah.
Don't think you need to change the name of the location. How did you first get into crypto?
So, do you know the online player Seth?
I've heard of him, yeah.
He had like a big picture of a steak as his icon, right? And he would play like 5-10, 9-handed, and he was a very average poker player. He would kind of like wait for scout games and win at 1.5 big blinds per 100 back in the day at 9-handed 5-10. But he's probably the most successful poker player, or at least top 2 or 3 that I know of today. He started getting into crypto. He got into crypto when it was sub $1, mining and buying. And by the time it got to $5 a coin, Bitcoin that is, he told me, buy Bitcoin. And I heard about it and I really dove into it and learned a lot about it. And I wish I would have been smart enough to buy Bitcoin at the time, right? But I kind of fell into this Peter Schiff argument, which, if you're familiar with the economist Peter Schiff, he actually lives in Puerto Rico, which is, I like cryptocurrency. I like the idea behind this Bitcoin, right? But at that point, it wasn't mainstream at all, right? But how do I know that Bitcoin's not the MySpace of cryptocurrency? I'm going to spend $5 a coin on Bitcoin right now, and it's going to be overtaken by Litecoin. Or at that point in time, it was like Feathercoin and Barbecue Coin, Aurora Coin, right? There were some ridiculous ones, right, that nobody who's recently got into crypto has probably ever heard of, right? But how do I know that Bitcoin's going to win out, right? So when I learned about crypto at $5 per Bitcoin, I was smart enough to go sell all of my gold, right? I owned some gold at the time, not a ton, but whatever, 10% of my portfolio in gold. I'm like, well, I'm never going to own gold again, because I think that cryptocurrency in general is a better store of value than gold, right? But I don't know if
that was a really good assessment. How early was that? What year?
That must have been, what are we talking about here? 2015?
Okay, 2015. So Bitcoin was already at several $100s at this point.
So it was 2013 then, whenever it was.
What was the price of Bitcoin at this point?
The price of Bitcoin when I made that decision was $5 a coin. So maybe it was 2012,
that's
2011.
2011-ish.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah. But then I ended up
Pretty
buying.
big difference.
I didn't end up buying until it was $100 a coin. It was about a year after that, 2012, $100 a coin. I was in Malta, I remember, and there were just a group of poker players, right? Really smart guys who I respect. And what we'd do is we'd play poker during the day, right? And then we'd go to dinner in Malta. And when we got to Malta, Bitcoin was like $18 a coin, right? And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, it's $100 a coin. And every night we go to dinner and we just debate Bitcoin. Like, should we buy it? What do you think is going to happen? Why is it going up? What's going on? And finally, like, one of our friends who just would go to these dinners but didn't really say very much, he just kind of listened. He's like, guys, I'm buying Bitcoin. Screw you guys. No more talk about it. I'm buying. And then everybody was like, all right, well, if he's buying, and we all kind of bought. And it was very fortunate that we did, because I made my first substantial investment in Bitcoin around $95 per coin.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I first got involved somewhere similar. It was, I think, 2013, a reasonably close price point, around $100 or so. So very, very fortunate to get in that early as well. I think poker was kind of nice as an on-ramp towards crypto, because as a poker player, you just have so many problems with banks and accessing your money and traveling and how to bring money, and bringing cash on you has all kinds of problems. And if you want to clear, and then bank wires are an issue. And if you lose your accounts at certain banks, like Bank of America banned me, for example, so I can't use that bank. So having cryptocurrency just kind of cuts through all that bullshit, and it lets you move money around a lot more easily. And then I think a lot of people sort of just stumbled into, oh shit, this is going up a lot. This is a really good long-term investment. It's interesting to me that you had such conviction so early, because at that point, the swings in Bitcoin were pretty huge, and it didn't have the same infrastructure it has today, where there are so many businesses based around Bitcoin that obviously it can have large swings, but it's not ever going back to $500 a coin or $1,000 a coin. Those days are far behind us. There are just too many businesses that rely on Bitcoin, use Bitcoin, and are kind of investing in the success of Bitcoin. I mean, even when you think about exchanges, right? You watch any NBA game today, you're going to see Coinbase, FTX, Crypto.com, all these different companies. They're promoting crypto at every turn. And the reality is, what happens when they do that? Well, some percentage of people are on-ramped into Bitcoin, right? That's going to help the price of cryptocurrency in general. So it's actually good for everyone that these exchanges are promoting themselves, because even though when they do well, it might be bad for their competitors, but the reality is people, new entries into crypto is good for the space as a whole, and good for whatever you're holding.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the first mainstream cryptocurrency commercial you remember seeing?
First mainstream commercial. I don't really remember that many until recently. I'm trying to think about ones that were from years ago. I can't even remember them.
Yeah.
What about
So
you?
for me, so first of all, the idea of a commercial, to me, if you're going to have a commercial about crypto, right, it's probably, or what I expected, going to be about a product or a service in the crypto space, right? Because who's going to make a commercial to just own Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's essentially a resource. It's like making a commercial to own gold without actually having somebody to sell the gold, right? Or that's what I thought anyway. And then I'm on a plane going to Puerto Rico, right, when I'm going to move there at the very end of 2017. And on the plane, there was a commercial for Dash.
Wow.
That was my first kind of mainstream. I'm sitting here on American Airlines or whatever, and it's like, buy Dash. And I'm like, and it wasn't even like, shilling an exchange to buy Dash. It was just like telling people to bid up the price of Dash, essentially.
That had to be all-time peak for Dash price.
Yeah, exactly.
There were a lot of currencies sort of like Dash, where they got big and they just slowly dropped over time. And that's, I think, given me some good insight in that you want to be very particular with which altcoins that you hold. I think altcoins are great. And I think that I see too many people hating on altcoins. I see the Bitcoin maxis, I see the ETH maxis. Obviously, you've got your no coiners who hate on everything. I think it's great for the space to have different coins, different projects, and people trying to do different things. But to have a sizable percentage of your net worth in these altcoins is much more risky. And so you want to have a lot more conviction in the strategy of those coins compared to the main large cap coins that we see today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you look historically, right, at just like, because people like to look at the rosy side of the equation, and they don't like to look at the gloomy side of the equation when it comes to investing in alts, right? If you look historically at altcoins in general, like which altcoins have performed well historically over the long run, and the answer is like Ethereum
Doge.
used to be considered an altcoin. Doge, right? Doge too. Right. But if you look, especially back in the day, right, when you and I first got in big, we were talking about Feather Coin, Barbecue Coin, like where the Aurora Coin, right? Aurora Coin was going to be the coin of Iceland, right? Where of these are nowhere to be found, right?
Filecoin's pretty old.
Filecoin,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Where is that in the top? Is that in the top 100?
I'd have to check this, but I think so. Yeah, I think it's 30 or 40th, 50th, like that.
But what we are seeing, which could be 36th Filecoin.
Yeah.
So right around FTM, right? So do you want to own Filecoin or FTM?
Probably. Well, actually, okay. I think I can make a reasonable argument for Filecoin.
Really?
I think so.
Can you get yield on your Filecoin?
That I'd have to take a rain check on. But I just meant holding the asset itself, not farming with it, right?
Yeah.
I think when some of these coins are around long enough and build enough community, I think that they have a bit of a price floor that a lot of these other coins don't have. I think a good example of that is Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin Cash has a very dedicated community. And so even if you don't like Bitcoin Cash, and I'm not a Bitcoin Cash holder, I don't think that Bitcoin Cash is very likely to disappear in 5 years. I think that community has gone through so much, they're going to stick together. I think you can say the same thing for Litecoin. I think you can say the same thing for a bunch of these coins that have kind of stood. When I say stood the test of time, I mean 6 years in crypto, right? So stood the test of time in crypto. I think that they're reasonably safe to be there. Whereas something like FTM has way more chance of growing substantially because it is an EVM chain and there's a lot of farming opportunity there. But it also, if in 3 years you said, you know what, FTM wasn't a thing, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. I could see that also happening, right?
For sure. Yeah, that makes sense. You kind of have a little bit more safety with the ones that have been around longer, is essentially. I was considering owning, I never ended up doing it, but I was considering owning a small amount of BSV just because I think, and this is an unpopular opinion, but I think it's pretty obvious that Craig Wright is Satoshi at this point.
Yeah, that's an unpopular. You're correct on that.
It's an unpopular opinion. Yeah.
You're joking, right?
No, I'm being serious. I think it's for sure above 50% that Craig Wright is Satoshi.
Wow. Seriously.
And all of the arguments made by the other side about Craig Wright not being Satoshi are basically, they're almost like conspiracy theory thinking arguments, right? They're basically like, well, if he was Satoshi, he could prove it by doing X, Y, or Z. Well, the burden is not on Craig to prove it, right? I mean,
no, you're essentially the burden is on Craig to prove it.
Well, he recently just perjured himself if he's not Satoshi, right? Multiple times. So there was just a huge court case around the whole premise was that he was Satoshi, right? A lot of resources were invested into that, right? So nobody else is claiming to be Satoshi, right? And I'm also not saying that Craig Wright is the sole Satoshi, right? There could have been other people working with him, but the idea at this point, if you talk to real OGs, right? Like before, we're talking like 3 years before you and I heard of Bitcoin, right? Which in Bitcoin terms, the real OGs in Bitcoin, these are people who say, yes, everything that Craig Wright says or does, the way that he speaks is consistent with my communication with Satoshi, right? And I think those people have the most knowledge about this. And the main reason why, honestly, in my opinion, that people think that Craig Wright can't be Satoshi or isn't Satoshi is just because people don't like him and they don't want to believe it, one. But two, they also don't want to give up the whole appeal. There's this appeal around Satoshi being anonymous, right? And people want to hold on to that dream. And my other thing is, from the first time that Craig Wright said he was Satoshi, my live read was that he is Satoshi. So there are actually studies on this. When people are people believe that other people are more likely to be lying when they get very upset about something or emotional about something, right? So if you ever play the game Werewolf, have you ever played that game?
Yeah.
And you put a new player on the stand, somebody who hasn't played the game before, and you're like, you're a werewolf, right? I think it's almost a dead read if the person's a new player. If they're like, I'm not what are you talking? I'm not, and they get really upset about it, right? That they're not a werewolf. And humans, for whatever reason, like, we have that backwards. We think, oh, that person's guilty. Look, he's getting all upset about it. But it's actually the opposite, right? If you've ever been accused of something that you didn't do, right? Something bad that you didn't do, you're just going to be more upset, emotional, dramatic, all of these things that I think came off in that initial Craig Wright interview. I mean, we've since learned that that's just kind of how he is. But in that interview, right, I think he seemed particularly upset about the situation, and I read it as true.
I wanted to give you a chance to hear out your side of this argument, but there are a couple really important factors here. First off, when you say the burden of proof isn't on Craig, what the fuck are you talking about? This isn't a court of law. This isn't, oh, you're going to go to jail because you're not so innocent until proven guilty. This is proving you're one of the most important people ever. Yes, the burden is on you to prove that you are. It's not just, oh, he says it, I guess we should take his word for granted. And then second off, it's a very simple situation. Satoshi has an absolute ton of coins. All he has to do is move some coins or sign showing that they're his, and this is over. He's Satoshi. So instead, he's going to spend years running around and calling himself Satoshi, and then not doing the one thing that, if he does, everyone knows he's Satoshi. What is he? Is he God, and he's testing the people of mankind with, you need to just have faith? Why would he not just move his coins and prove that he is Satoshi?
So again, this goes back to my original point. Is it's kind of like a conspiracy thinking theory, right? Whenever you say, why doesn't somebody or some entity or some government just do X because they didn't do X, Y must be true, right? You're missing the whole thing proving that Y is true. Maybe Craig Wright doesn't want to prove that he's Satoshi. Maybe he doesn't want people to really think that he's Satoshi, right? Maybe there's all sorts of things that could be motivating him.
No, that doesn't make sense. Why does he go around giving lectures talking about being Satoshi and speaking everywhere he can and fight publicly to be Satoshi if he doesn't want people to view him as Satoshi? That makes no sense.
My point, Doug, is that there could be 10 different factors here, right? One factor that's been speculated on is that maybe Satoshi's Bitcoins are not accessible to him because they're in a trust, right? Because they're locked up in a trust. Maybe it would be some sort of tax event if Satoshi moved these coins. Maybe if Craig Wright actually proved for certain that he is Satoshi, he is worried that he'd have some sort of government authority after him.
So instead, he runs around saying he's Satoshi, but doing it with no credibility.
Well, I don't think no credibility is true, right? That's where
very little credibility.
So when I say the burden is not on him, I'm approaching it from a perspective of outsider. You and I are outsiders just speculating, right? We're spitballing on whether or not Craig Wright's Satoshi. And what I'm saying is that your side wants absolute proof, right? Whereas, and you basically come with the assumption that Craig Wright should be or is motivated to prove this to us. I think that is a false assumption. And if we aren't sure whether or not Craig Wright is, ultimately motivated to prove this, right, we need to look at a plurality of the circumstances. And in a plurality of the circumstances, nobody else has come out and contradicted his claim and said, no, I am Satoshi. He just went to court, where the only time in Craig Wright's career, right, where it has been imperative upon him to be truthful and honest about whether or not he's Satoshi by risk of committing a crime, right, by risk of perjury, was recently. And he came out and unequivocally said that he is Satoshi. And in fact, the person who sued him, right, who's an OG in Bitcoin, right, would be just tilting at windmills. Is that the idea? That he's just suing some random person he's hoping to get lucky?
Well, that lawsuit, I think the idea there is he knows that Craig Wright is claiming to be Satoshi. And if he is claiming to be Satoshi, then he stands to win a bunch of money if he was Satoshi. And then if he's not Satoshi, he still might have a lot of money to where he can collect. There's some amount of money that Craig Wright would pay just for people to view him as Satoshi. And I want to say this too. You have a career, all careers you've had have been based on estimating the likelihood of things. And so now, rather than estimating the likelihood given the factors that we do have and know, you're saying, what about this? What about that? What about this thing? And sure, those aren't 0% factors, but they're very small factors compared to someone that has at many points said that they are Satoshi and then has not ever produced actual legitimate proof that he is Satoshi, that if Satoshi wanted to prove, he could. So is Craig Wright 0% Satoshi? No. But is it very, very, very unlikely? Yes. And so if something is 99% true, we have to sort of exist in this world that it is true or isn't. We have to look at the very likely outcome and base our decisions off of that, not the what if it is outcome. We can't function in that way.
No. I'm maybe you don't understand. I am looking at it in terms of probabilistically whether or not Craig Wright's Satoshi, and I'm not saying that I think 100% he is Satoshi. I'm saying that if I had to pick a side, I'd say it's above 50% that he is Satoshi. My whole argument comes down to you are taking your own personal motivations, right, that you might have in his situation and putting them on Craig Wright, right? It's very likely that Craig Wright has some severe form of Asperger's, right? He's going to react differently in situations than perhaps you and I could appreciate or understand, right? Maybe he enjoys conflict. Maybe he gets off on the fact that people say he's not Satoshi. We're assigning motivation to him that, like, there would be so many factors to think about if you were actually the creator of Bitcoin here, that it's, in my opinion, not a foregone conclusion that, oh yeah, of course he's just going to prove it cryptographically, right? And from my perspective, right, some sort of adversarial stance from governments would be at the top of the list.
I don't understand why someone that is Satoshi and is claiming to be Satoshi wouldn't prove it. And then to go on the other side of this, how many times, Kane, have we seen people lie in order to build followings and exploit them for money? How many times in human history? That happens over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Sure.
How many times, on the other hand, are people extremely successful and powerful, but lay low, but claim to be powerful, but just don't because they have Asperger's? That is an extremely, extremely rare scenario compared to people just trying to use their name to build power.
Would you agree those people who are trying to use their name to build power often get exposed? Right? If you start presenting with me evidence other than, well, I would expect Satoshi to do this because this is what I would do in his shoes, right? To me, that's not evidence. If you present evidence like, look at the BSV white paper compared to the Bitcoin white paper, and here's the reason why, this use of language or this use of logic or whatever else. Instead, what we have is the real technical guys and the real OGs all saying, yeah, I mean, if he's not Satoshi, then he's Satoshi's twin. I mean, the way that he speaks.
All the real technical guys? All the real technical guys?
I wouldn't say all, but I'd say a plurality of them. The people who don't believe that Craig Wright is Satoshi is retail. It's retail who don't want to believe it, who don't like the guy.
I don't think that's true. I think we need to talk to some crypto OGs and get some takes on this. I'm actually going to have Charlie Lee on the podcast in a few weeks. I'd like his take.
Get his take, yeah.
Maybe we can talk to we got to talk to some people, because I thought this was a lot more clear cut than you're making it sound. And certainly some OGs and technical people don't think that Craig Wright is Satoshi. Also, when you look at the Bitcoin SV, I can't even think. Is it Bitcoin SV? What's his brand of Bitcoin?
BSV. Yeah,
BSV. Satoshi's True Vision, by the way. He gets to write that white paper way after the original Bitcoin one, and of course, if he writes it, he's going to make it sound like the original one. This reminds me of Mormonism, Kane. It reminds me. You can't say that John Smith didn't have the golden plates. You can't. Why would he lie? Just because you would show the plates doesn't mean that he would. Dumb. That's. I feel like what's going on here.
If you want specific names, Gavin Andreessen is one of the guys who probably was the closest to Satoshi, right, in the early days, and he says unequivocally that Craig Wright is Satoshi.
All right, we'll have to get some takes. What about Andreas Antonopoulos? What does he say about this? Have you heard his take?
I don't know. I actually haven't really followed him recently. You know, a lot of the, you know, OG crypto guys like don't have as big platforms anymore. It's a little bit to me, it's a little bit disheartening, like the way that where crypto's gone, right? Like back in the day, it was like about ideas and about like freedom and about like these kind of libertarian philosophies, right? And today it's about like, you know, oh, pump and dump, and, you know, buy this shit coin, and you know, oh, come to my crypto channel, I'm a crypto wizard, and meanwhile this person, you know, has never done anything in crypto, or you know, it's just kind of watching the what would be the word, just as crypto adopted mainstream, it's kind of been disheartening how it's gotten away from kind of ideals and more into just like shilling stuff to random people.
On that note, today's podcast is brought to you by CoinFLEX. CoinFLEX is a crypto futures exchange which sees over $2 billion in daily trading volume. What the team has built on top of this powerful futures trading engine is a suite of innovative crypto yield products. CoinFLEX is committed to making crypto yield accessible to everyone, and a cornerstone of that strategy is flexUSD. FlexUSD is the world's first interest-earning stablecoin. You can compound your interest 3 times a day, every 8 hours on-chain, meaning you can hold FlexUSD in a cold wallet and still earn interest. FlexUSD recently surpassed $360 million in market cap and has paid over $10 million in interest to holders in the last year alone. Creating FlexUSD is super simple and currently pays between 10 and 20% annually. I know this community has mixed thoughts on cryptocurrency, but what we are talking about here is a 10 to 20% return annually on US dollars. No exposure to those nasty financial downturns in Bitcoin and Ethereum price, just interest in a USD stablecoin automatically sent to your wallet 3 times a day. To learn more about FlexUSD, head on over now to www.flexusd.com. Legal disclaimer: none of the information contained here constitutes an offer to buy or sell any currency, product, or financial instrument, to make any investment, or to participate in any particular trading strategy. All right. Seemed on topic to throw it in there.
That was good timing there. Yeah.
All right. So talking about the big names in cryptocurrency, but by the way, I think that a lot of people seem to think the most likely person at Satoshi is Hal Finney because he died, and it makes a lot of sense that dead people don't move coins. I think it's safe to say that dead people are a lot less likely to move coins than alive people. So that does have some credibility. Also, he was super OG. He was around on the earliest forums talking with people. So what are your thoughts on the Hal Finney idea?
Yeah, I mean, the Hal Finney, it would be consistent with Satoshi. The only difference is that with Hal Finney, we have a lot less speeches, writings, you know, things like that to kind of go through and pick through. Is this consistent with Satoshi? Right. Number one. And number two, importantly, Hal Finney never claimed to be Satoshi, and Craig Wright is, and that should carry with it some weight.
I actually view that as worse. I think.
You think that Nick Szabo is more likely to be Satoshi, having never claimed? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
I think so. Yeah, I think it does make sense, because if Satoshi wanted to prove he was Satoshi, he can, and he hasn't. So what's more likely, that someone claiming to be Satoshi that could prove it but doesn't is saying Satoshi and is, or that Satoshi has not revealed himself or is dead and is not proving it because he's never proved it? I think that makes way more sense than this other one. That so by this logic, Kane, I could start saying I'm Satoshi, and then you'd say, well, Doug's saying he is Satoshi. We have to consider that. No, you don't. I'm not Satoshi.
How about this? If you said that you were Satoshi tomorrow, the only thing that I'm saying here is that it's more likely that you're Satoshi than had you never said that. That's the only point I'm making. Then you got to look at a plurality of the circumstances, right? Would you at least agree that if tomorrow Kane Kalas came out and said I was Satoshi, you assign a higher probability to me being Satoshi than you do right now? I mean, right now that probability is 0%, right? But if tomorrow I said that I'm Satoshi, maybe it would be 0.1%.
I don't think it changes. I think it's still just 0%. I don't think it works. I don't think what people say matters here. I think it's what they do, because we're talking about
even when facing perjury.
Okay. Let me put it like this. I think someone that there's two different options here. It's sort of each one of these things is binary. It's either a 0 or a 1. 0 or 1, you say you're Satoshi. 0 or 1, you prove you're Satoshi. People that are the 1 saying they are Satoshi, but the 0 on proving it, that just seems incredibly unlikely that you're Satoshi. It seems that you're trying to capitalize on using your name to make money off of pretending to be Satoshi, which makes a lot of sense. I can't hate the man for scamming some people if he isn't Satoshi, right? I mean, what's a good scam can always, I mean, that's great. That's the American spirit.
You just keep coming back to the same argument, which is that he must prove that he's Satoshi in order for it to be true. Right. It would be like if we asked Joe Biden, do you have access to the U.S. To nuclear arms? Could you at the snap of a finger detonate a nuke? And then he's like, yes, I could. And Doug Polk's like, prove it. And then he doesn't prove it. And Doug's like, you see, Joe Biden does not have access to our country's nukes. Right. Well, that's the same line of thinking.
The thing about Biden is that he stole the election. And Trump's actually president right now. So what you're seeing is Biden. Biden is just a shell puppet of Biden because Biden passed away years ago. And let me check the date. On January 17th, there's going to be a big announcement. Stay tuned. January 17th. Mark that on your calendar. You're going to know the truth about Biden and the fact that it was a stolen election by the people in Arizona and Georgia and the deep state. And they all colluded against the freedom fighter, Donald Trump. And he's going to win. He's going to win the election. And by the way, if I could get some odds, maybe I'll bet Donald Trump is president by, I don't know, let's call it March next year.
Well, I'll tell you what, he's certainly not going to be president by March next year. But unfortunately, I think he's going to be president in 2024.
Let's talk about that because there's some interesting stuff to talk about. I've checked the odds periodically on the presidential election for 2024. I find it fascinating, and I think you actually had a really sharp call. And I really like your calls on predicting some of the more general mainstream topics like Bitcoin price or political markets. Or I feel like you have a good sense of where things are at. And more often than not, when I hear you take a side, you end up being right. So I think you've done a really nice job of picking sides well and having good logic behind it. So I'm interested in your thoughts here. You were one of the first people that said to me that I think that Trump's value is way underrated right now. His chance to win in 2024. I forgot what the odds that he had to win the election were, but they were something like 8-1 or something like that, I think, at the time.
Yeah, 7-1.
Okay, 7-1. So what are they today?
So what's really interesting is they were 7-1. I loved that bet, and I wasn't able to get down much action. And the reason for that is because I didn't want to lock up my money for 3 years. I mean, right now I'm making 50% plus yield farming. I mean, even if I win the bet for sure, what am I breaking? I'm making a little bit on that bet. So I couldn't really lock up my funds. Timex didn't want the action. So I wasn't able to really capitalize on it. But yeah, I mean, the logic was that the logic basically came to the psyche of Donald Trump. So the first question was Donald Trump going to run again? Right. And to answer that question, and which is still a question, right, to some people, not really to me, you need to go to Donald Trump's psyche. Is Donald Trump going to end his career a loser? I think the answer needs to be unequivocally no, right? He's going to do everything in his power. That's all he cares about. I mean, the man is such a narcissist. He is motivated by not being a loser, even to the point of claiming that there was some fraudulent election, right? Which is complete nonsense, right? Just so he could feel like he didn't lose. And in fact, to the people who think that there was this massive election fraud in our election, right? They're forgetting about the fact that Donald Trump was setting up this same line of thinking the first time around when he beat Hillary, right? When it looked like he was going to lose. He was saying, oh, well, if I lose, there's fraud. This is just his line, right?
That one wasn't rigged, though, because he won.
Right.
This one was rigged because Biden won.
But the election in 2024 isn't going to need to be rigged for Trump to win. And in my opinion, Trump will win in 2024 unless I'm less attracted by the 3-to-1 odds than I was at 7-to-1, right? So I'm not saying go out and bet the farm on Trump 2024, because honestly, I think right now, probably more than any time in U.S. political history during an incumbent president, there's so much uncertainty, right? I mean, Joe Biden is less likely to win the election as an incumbent in 2024 than Donald Trump is currently, right? If you take the betting odds, right? And then even same with Kamala. So I basically just think it was basically a bet that Donald Trump will be running on the Republican side in 2024, A, right? B, it would be political suicide for anybody to go up against him, right?
On the Republican side.
On the Republican side. I think that it makes so much more sense, right? If anybody wants to have to be president in the future, to not isolate the Trumpians in the world, right? Donald Trump's a pretty old guy, right? Just let him have his time and then come out next election cycle. So I don't think it makes sense for anybody to seriously oppose Donald Trump. And that's not even considering Donald Trump's how vindictive he is. I mean, if you oppose Donald Trump in this election, you can expect Donald Trump is going to be trying his hardest to shoot down your political career, right? And then at that point, it's just like, will the Democrats be so objectionable? Will the Biden administration be so objectionable that they're going to drive people to vote for Donald Trump again in 2024? And in my, at the time, I thought it was possible, maybe not likely. Now I think that, in fact, it's likely.
Nate Silver came on this podcast, and I asked him about the betting markets, and he actually also thought that Donald Trump was a great bet at 7-to-1, right before things started to move towards him. It's an interesting time in politics because you have a very fractured Republican Party in the Trump versus non-Trump segments, and then you just have a very dislikable Democrat Party. So it puts us in this space where it's kind of hard to see who is going to win. And I think that the people that just have big support groups and platforms that are somewhat unified are going to have a great shot. And I think Trump's much more in that position than either of the main Democrats right now with Biden or Kamala. Biden's approval ratings dropped a lot. He's frankly just way too old. And then Kamala is very dislikable. I don't like Kamala. I don't want to get this into what my personal opinions are and everything, but when she basically called Biden a racist, I just, come on, this guy has been a Democrat for his entire life. You think that this guy's a racist with the bus thing that she called him out for? And if I was in Biden's shoes, I would have never selected her after that for VP. She ran her campaign into the ground. She bankrupted her own. She was front running the primary and then ran her campaign into the ground by overspending and couldn't keep it going. And that's the person where, okay, that's our next president. She couldn't even financially run her own campaign. Now we're going to put her in there for president. So I don't like either of the Democrats. I absolutely despise Trump. The main reason, probably the only reason at its core is I fucking hate liars. And I know all politicians lie. I'm not going to defend Biden or Kamala or these people. But how much you lie and how big you lie matter too. And when we're gonna get to the point where we're gonna try and sow dissent in the entire system and pretend this is Russia and it's rigged elections, which it's not. They are fair and overseen by Democrats and Republicans. And we're gonna go after Republicans at local levels and try and shake them out so that we can have Trump guys in there. So next time we're ready to do what we have to do. That's scary. That's dangerous. And it's really against the fabric of our democracy. And when you're lying to your followers to get them to fall in line with that, that's just too fucked up for me. I just can't support someone that's doing that. So I would vote for Biden or Kamala in a heads-up match between the two. But if a non-Trumper, a non-MAGA Republican candidate came up, I could definitely vote for them over Kamala or Biden because I don't like either of them.
Right. I agree with everything you just said, including Trump being a huge liar, right? He basically uses facts to his political advantage more than we've seen any politician in U.S. history, right? This is a common thing in politics. But for Trump, it's not just a common thing, I think, for him politically. I think it's a common thing for him in his personal life, right? It's just who he is, right? He just creates his own version of reality and hopes that enough people around him believes it, such that it'll work, right? But for me, the real question is, who is our country better served by being at the helm? And in my opinion, Joe Biden has actually lost it. I mean, in my opinion, he's totally senile. I think there's enough evidence out there that he just literally doesn't know where he is or what position he's running for. And these are not, you can go back and look at George W. Bush, and you can see what it looks like for a politician to misspeak, right? And realize that he said the wrong thing and correct himself. And then you can go look at Joe Biden and look at what it looks like for somebody to literally just not really know what's going on around him anymore, or lose where he is in the world, right? And that's probably the fact that we have to choose between these two candidates, right, is insane within itself.
Horrible. It's horrible.
But to me, the worst thing we could have is the leader of our country not know what's going on around him, right?
Well, to push back on that, I think that what is good about Biden is I think he will just defer to the people around him basically for anything. I think he has almost no real positions that he feels actually strongly about. He's just a face, and the puppet people behind are pulling the strings, and he's just cool with them doing whatever. So while it would be the most dangerous world is someone with Donald Trump's personality and Joe Biden's recognition of who he is and where he is and what's going on. That would be a real dangerous candidate for president. So I do think that there's some safety in that.
Yeah. Well, one would think, but in my opinion, if you look at the policies of this administration so far, it's been abhorrent. I mean, I think that life in the United States under Donald Trump and on the global stage of the United States was significantly better than life in the United States under Joe Biden, right? And if you look at the policies out of the administration, or even if you look at whether or not what the administration's saying or doing makes sense, I think that in all those categories, it was better under the Trump administration, despite the fact that Trump is a huge liar, right? I think we got a much better hand under the Trump administration. And I think the Americans in the middle, who basically voted for Biden because the reasons we're talking about, they just hated Donald Trump. They just hate him personally, right? They're now starting to see, well, I think life was better under Trump. And I think that the Trump administration, made more sense in their policies.
There are some interesting arguments to be made for Trump. A metaphor I like to give on this is Donald Trump is the crazy guy with a knife walking down the alley. And it's just, so he's America in this example, and you're the other guy, right? And you're, maybe I'll rob that guy. I think I got a knife. You're like, okay, I'm not going to fuck with that guy. That's basically Donald Trump in the alley. And so when he negotiates with other countries, people are, probably wouldn't bomb us, but I think we're cool just letting Trump have this one, right? And you can see that kind of play out in a lot of different ways. The Iran example, I think, was the best one, where he really, I don't know how to phrase this eloquently, but he basically just was like, don't fuck with us, or there's going to be problems, right? And he did that in a way that other leaders of the U.S. would never do ever. They'd be politically correct. They would not engage in that kind of way. And maybe that's better on average, or maybe that's worse on average. There's a lot of variance with that approach, but a very U.S.-centric international policy makes sense when you're the U.S. And I don't think that you should be afraid to say that. I think that there's a big thing on the left, and this has to be good for the world. This has to be good for everyone. This has to be part of the progressive agenda. Borders aren't really a thing, man. It's all just one big world. No, we're a country, and I like our leader to be pro-U.S., U.S. first. Yeah. I think that that's fine. I don't see that shouldn't be considered a bad thing. I think that a lot of Trump's real shortcomings are personally, of course, and then on his domestic policies regarding, the way he dealt with COVID as an example, horrific. And the fact that he didn't even acknowledge this was a thing for so long when the data was clearly there, and he just thought it would go away, and it would be, it cost him the election, really, the way he handled COVID. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's definitely one of the things that hurt him. I mean, we saw Trump's popularity numbers going down kind of consistently throughout his presidency. And I think it's a result of the lies. It's a result of him being so unlikable. Oh, he had the worst average approval ratings of any president, I think, maybe of all time.
I don't think that it dropped over time, though. I think he entered at the lowest and he just stayed around there his whole presidency. He actually had a remarkably stable approval rating because most people had already decided on Trump whether they liked him or not.
That's true, but at one point it was above 50%, right? And by the end of his presidency, I believe it was 38%. So we definitely did see it falling, right, in the later days of his presidency, and it's really like we said. I think it's less a result of his policy and more a result of his administration, who he is, what he stands for, right? I mean, if you just look at the moral fabric of Donald Trump, right? If you just look at what Donald Trump represents, what he stands for, right? I mean, when else in political history has it become such a huge social stigma simply to support one political presidential candidate? I mean, if you come out today and you say, I'm a supporter of Donald Trump, people think that you're a bigot. People think that you have all these unfavorable qualities, and it's no coincidence there. It's because Donald Trump does not have a deep moral fabric when he makes his decisions. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but to me, it seems like Donald Trump is just doing whatever is necessary for him to get the most credit at the end and to win, right? It's just about whatever serves Donald Trump's personal egotistical interests the best.
The media has also built this narrative that all of the Trump supporters are racist people that are only voting toward Trump because they're anti, minority rights and support and women and whatever else. There's this massive push to try and make them seem bad, when the reality is most of them are just normal people that have different views than the people on the left do. And then both sides pick the far side of the spectrum and show, the left will show KKK meetings, the right will show Antifa, and they'll go back and forth saying, look, this is your opponent. When no, that's not your opponent. That's just the absolute fringe. And they're using that to build narratives and get clicks. This is approval ratings by president, by the way. And Trump never, it looks like he broke, he was 45 right out of the gate, but I don't think he ever broke 45 again. And his low point was 37. So
wow. Yeah. But at the end, I think he was 38. I'm not sure if this really shows it, but at the very end,
it cuts off right at the end.
Yeah.
But the point that I'm making is Trump had very little movement in his approval rating because people had to really decide with Trump. The Trump brand of politics was, it knocked everyone off the fence. You either don't like him or you like him. And once you're locked in, especially the way that he talked to his followers and the media talked about him, once you had locked into your tribe, there was so little room for maneuvering because there were so few people in the middle left that it couldn't shift the approval ratings that much. Whereas someone like Joe Biden, people are very lukewarm on Joe Biden at best. So there's way more room for him to move down. And the people that don't like Joe Biden, on average, dislike him way less than the people that dislike Trump. So there's a lot of movement there. As you can see, when Biden started as president, he had a plus 17 approval rating, and then today he's -9. That's an incredible swing compared to the absolute swings that Trump went through over his entire presidency. And you can see some of the other presidents, right? Obama started off at 62, he got down to 44, ended at 50, whatever. Probably got a nice Trump boost when people realized what was potentially coming up. Bush obviously had 9/11, so it's very different. And then the longer you go back, the less accurate the polling data is, so it's less smooth. But you can still see some of the older ones.
Trump was still the least popular on average, right? Was it Trump or Jimmy Carter? How low did Jimmy Carter get?
Jimmy Carter's Valley was the lowest, and I imagine if Nixon had post-Watergate approval,
Nixon's crushing it. Nixon looks like the highest on average.
Killing it. Absolutely killing it.
Oh, to JFK. JFK is the highest. Look at that. JFK.
Yeah,
did he peak at 90%? Is that even possible on the left?
83.
83. Wow.
The older the polling data, though, the less reliable it is, I think. But
yeah.
Bush post 9/11.
What is that? 88.6?
88.18.
Wow.
Like not good for Biden so far, that's for sure. Not good for Biden.
Yeah, I think to the point you were making before, I mean, obviously what you're saying is absolutely true, that both sides are trying to straw man the other side, not just in terms of their positions, right, which is objectionable enough in my view, but also in terms of who they are as people, right? And that's when it gets even worse. But I think that the left is significantly more guilty of this than the right, because what you see from the left is that if you're in the center, you're labeled as alt-right. I mean, the left is literally labeling people like Sam Harris, who is pretty left-leaning, as alt-right. And so at this point, I feel like this is why the people who are in the middle, like, reasonable people in America, are essentially saying, well, I guess if I'm on the left, then it means I support like extreme socialism, this extreme woke culture, and I definitely don't do that. So I guess I'm voting Republican.
It's interesting to me because the young generation of people on the left is a lot more like that, where they have to make this decision. Whereas I think that your older Democrat voter is more just old school Democrat, where they're slightly liberal, but they're not that liberal. And they don't really care or know that a lot of this stuff's going on because they're not in the social media streets where this stuff's happening. They don't see it locally. They're in their own little bubble. And I think one of the reasons that Biden won the election was that he was able to really win over a lot of these older Democrat voters that are not a part of that woke crowd. Most of the Democrat Party isn't that. It's just what you see online and what, Bonomo's tweeting about or whatever in the poker circles. So you might, that's certainly true. And there is a element of the far left really going after the slightly, just the moderate left. And I see this with me personally, because I'm more of a liberal than I am a conservative. I've only voted in a couple elections. I voted Democrat both times. I would definitely vote for Republicans in the right scenario. But what I see is if I take if I have a stance that's on the other side of maybe what the left thinks is an issue, an example would be immigration. I am actually for stronger immigration policy. I get told I'm literally Hitler or whatever the response is, right? It's like, guys, I'm not the bad guy here. I get, or maybe I am the bad guy. Maybe it's people like me. They're the reason that if you alienate people like that and you don't play towards the common denominator, which is you need to win over moderates to win elections, then it's not good for the party in the long run. So that's something that the left needs to stay away from, and is certainly worrisome that they could end up going that direction.
Yeah, I mean, if you were less ideological, less philosophical, if you had less self-confidence, then you would react to that by saying, well, forget it, I'm voting Republican, right? Because what the left has done is there's so much finger pointing going on. Oh, well, he's a racist and this is bigoted. And everybody's kind of sitting at home listening to this on CNN or MSNBC and saying, well, hold on a second, because, I'm not a racist. And, I've made this same sort of innocuous statement in my life. And therefore, I guess if I vote for the left, then I'm conceding that I'm a racist or that I'm a sexist or whatever else. But in fact, I just acknowledge that women do better than men in liberal arts, and men in school have historically done better than women in math and sciences. But the left now is telling me that if I make that statement, then I'm sexist, and I'm not sexist. So I guess I'm a Republican, right? And you see more and more people saying that, that they almost have to vote Republican. Otherwise they're conceding that they are a racist or they're a bigot, right? And to be specifically, what still a majority of this country is, which are Caucasians who were born in America, right? Straight Caucasians born in America, men and women, right? You almost have this big target on you from the left, right? It's like just by virtue of being, and in my case, a male, straight Caucasian, right? It's like we're public enemy number one. And it's like I've gotten into the most insane debates on the people on Twitter where like I post a political opinion and they're like, well, you can't say that because you're white. I mean, it's the craziest thing ever, right? And for people who perhaps aren't as politically inclined, right? They care less about the issues. That's how they form their political opinions. They're like, well, the left is telling me that my words have no value because whatever reason, I'm white or I'm straight. And so I must be a Republican because I disagree with that line of thought, even though I agree with the left maybe on welfare reform, right? I'm not saying me personally. I'm saying your average person. Maybe if I agree on the left with the redistribution of resources to people in our poorest communities. Maybe if I agree with the left on having higher taxes, right? I'm at the very least, I know that I'm not a bigot or a racist, and essentially they're saying that because I'm a white straight male, I have to be, therefore I'm voting Republican.
Well, you might be a racist by the standards that they're setting, because you might view being a racist as different than they view being a racist. To you, you might say, I view everyone equally, and to them that might be racist.
Well, right.
Because the viewpoints are not the same. It's not. So I remember when I was a kid, my parents both are very good people. My mom's a nurse. My dad's always run nonprofits. Just all around amazing people that have spent their whole lives helping people. And they taught me, Doug, you don't look at people by their race or their gender. You look at them as people, and you treat everyone equally, because that's the way that you're supposed to live. And I thought that makes sense. Everyone's equal. And then you get older and you realize, no, that's not a universally agreed consensus. That is, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this. It's just so delicate. It's just very delicate waters here. There are arguments that people make that you need to be treating people differently in certain ways because they have been disadvantaged and you've been advantaged in your life. And I don't agree with that. I think that once you start to go down the road of, I'm going to treat you differently because you're X, you've already lost. You're already into this territory, and now we're treating people differently based on factors, and we have to rate those factors, and we have to decide, okay, well, he's this and she's that, but this one kind of is worth more than that. But then, and now we're assigning value to if it's more important to be which minority, or you're a woman, or what's the value of a woman versus the value of someone that's gay. How do we? And then you're already stuck in this sort of trap of trying to get down the road of identity politics, and you have to look at everything through identity politics, and we have to have government policy that assigns value to different traits and backgrounds and whatever else, instead of just trying to be as fair as we can, understanding that the system is flawed and that there is real systemic racism against certain people in this country. I think that that's the only way that practically makes sense. Okay, in a perfect world, if we could exactly isolate the value that people lose by being in certain classes of people, and we could fix them, then sure. But we don't live in that world. That's an idealistic world that does not exist. And I think that trying to institute policies to help certain types of people is racist and wrong, and long term will not succeed.
Yeah, we entirely agree on there. And it's totally the type of rhetoric that we're seeing, again, specifically from the left these days, is like, it's kind of like the opposite of what Martin Luther King, right, was advocating for, right? And he was advocating for this kind of colorblind idea that you have. And ultimately, that's where we want the world to go. And there's a belief now that no, if for the time being, right, for the next however many years, who knows, nobody sets a time frame on it, we treat people who have black skin differently than people who have white skin, or than Asians or Hispanics. We need to do that for some period of time in order to get to this point where everybody's treated equally. And that's just false. It's like the sooner that we go to treating people equally, the better, right?
Let's just play I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment. Let's say that you're a black person in America and you have to deal with all this fucking bullshit that white people don't have to deal with. You have to deal with cops treating you terribly. You have to deal with people being more afraid of you in situations like dark areas. You have to deal with not getting maybe some of the jobs that you might get if you had a different name, you were a different skin color, and you deal with all that shit. And then you say, well, that sounds great, guys, that we should all just be like that. But because we're not, and because I have to deal with this real problem every day, something has to be done to help me. What would you say to that?
I would say that I understand and sympathize that depending on your race, right, you're going to have a different experience in this world. Okay. And I also agree with the premise that in many circumstances, being black in the United States, right, disadvantages you in unfair ways, right? But it's not isolated to race, right? So if we want to talk about career success, right, what do you think is the number one thing that determines somebody's socioeconomic status in their career?
I would imagine it's how wealthy their family was.
So that's not correct. It's IQ, and it's not even really close. And it's across the board. We're talking about success as a construction worker, as well as success as a CEO, right? Somebody's IQ is the most determinative thing of how successful they're going to be in their career, much more than race. I mean, race, the difference between blacks and whites and how successful they are in their career, or the gender pay gap between men and women, right? It's literally negligible if you look at IQ. If you look at somebody with 135 IQ versus somebody with a 68 IQ, in who's going to be more successful, right? So if we're worried about equalizing things for people, we should start there. We should start with the variable where people are the most far apart, right? Now, I'm not advocating for that, but I'm saying this idea that we need to equalize things on a basis of, oh, well, this person's Hispanic and this other person's white, and therefore there's a difference there, and we need to account for that, really just shows how racist we are, because race doesn't really matter that much. I mean, it matters a little bit, but not compared to IQ. If we were less racist and we were more objective and we were just looking at things in terms of, okay, what are the qualities that really differentiate how successful somebody's likely to be in their job, right? Or how much of a tough time people are going to have in this world. The number one thing that differentiates us is IQ, certainly in terms of career success, and there are studies to indicate this.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. I knew IQ was important. I didn't realize that it was the number one factor. There's a little bit of, if you come from a wealthy family, though, then you're going to end up with money from them. Are we talking about purely through your own efforts, or are we including that when we're talking about someone's success? Because you have this,
no.
you have the safety net of that when you're from a wealthy family.
Yeah, I'm just talking about somebody's individual success in their own career, right? Okay. But it's kind of a good pivot, right? We can now pivot to, is it fair that, so I came from a successful family, right? And as a result of that, I had all sorts of benefits. I had genetic benefits, obviously, right? My family.
This guy. Come on, Kane. That was wow. So modest.
If you come from a family that's been successful, you are more likely on average to inherit, for example, a higher IQ. Is the point that I'm making. But outside of that, there are other advantages as well, right? You have that safety net, right? I was able to I went to some fantastic schools, right? I have all sorts of advantages that other people don't have, right? And I think a lot of people kind of take for granted this premise that that's wrong, and I just simply disagree, right? I think that one of the number one things that motivates people to be successful, right, is to earn enough resources they can support their children and their children's children. And historically, that's always been the case. And so if we want a population that's motivated to succeed, that's motivated to build things, right, we can't have policies that make my life circumstances equal to somebody who was born of, a family where they had fewer resources, because then what you're doing is you're taking away my parents' motivation to succeed on a basis of giving me, or perhaps even my children, an advantage in the world.
Does it make sense because of someone's grandparents' success, that they get to have significant advantages over the people around them?
There are all sorts of things in this world that don't make sense. The thing that makes that's even more determinative of success is IQ. Does it make sense that your next door neighbor was born with an 85 IQ and you were born with 130 IQ, and therefore you're extremely more the high IQ and maybe not as much as the genetics in your case, but
joke. Yeah, we didn't have that great genetics, unfortunately. We were a middle class family, and I scrapped it together and told a few jokes on YouTube, and here I am.
Well, I'll tell you what, you got the genetics to look good in the sleeveless shirts. That's always a thing. You got the hair. You drew the hair gene.
That I did. I have a tip for you, Ken. You strike me as a fellow man that perspires. I've got just the outfit for you. Okay, think very open, free flowing. Okay.
What do we got?
Tank top.
Tank top's the outfit.
Huh? I sweat just as bad as you, if not worse. And so I can't wear shirts like that because I just get soaked. And so if you were tank topping it up right now, you'd be chilling.
That's true.
Yeah,
this is something that you extend though outside of your own space, your own home. What's your opinion when you go out in public and there are people smelling the Doug Polk odor, getting to view all of what Doug Polk has to offer, all of those great genetics that you have coming from your family? I mean, is that something that you consider?
This is where excessive amounts of deodorant and a little bit of cologne and just the free flowing breeze, it just takes care of it. And then I always wear socks with my flip flops because I get really sweaty feet. And so it just mops it up. And then I never have to worry about destroying my shoes and flip flops because I didn't know that for years, and it cost me many shoes.
Have you ever been at the poker table in a tank top and somebody to either your left or your right, said something to you, or you could tell was visibly, wish that you were wearing something where your armpits weren't exposed?
Because of the smell, or because they don't like that I'm in a tank top?
No, maybe, I mean, you're just sitting next to somebody and they, let's say you go and put out a bet with your chips, right? And then your armpit's exposed, you got pit hair coming out next to this guy. I mean, is that something that an experience you've ever had?
I've not. Maybe people have been too afraid to tell me, I'm not sure. And I have noticed people have an obsession with armpits because I don't shave my armpits. And in a lot of my videos, people have really had
they want you to shave those armpits.
They said, this is not acceptable. I'm not even okay with the tank top, but if we're going to have the tank top, I better not see any hair under that armpit. People are weird, man.
I've never gotten into the armpit shaving myself.
Well, people wouldn't know because you have those sweaty pits right now.
Is this a new product that you're launching over here to help me with? You should start a tank top company. Oh, by the way, so after I did the course on Upswing, I got all your merch. And my girlfriend has been petitioning for a Upswing shirt. We have one with a king on the front. She wants one with a queen on the front for women.
That would be good for our 0.7% female audience. We should definitely branch out a little bit. Let me tell. I'll tell. Actually, Caitlin does all our designs.
Okay. Yeah.
So
pass it on.
Caitlin, yeah.
Well, it's funny. We should. It was funny, the story of. Do you remember meeting Amanda?
I'm trying.
The story of how you met, because I had just done this Upswing course. I got this merchandise, and then Amanda basically said, "I'm taking it all over, and I'm wearing it." And so, if you don't see me in Upswing shirts, it's because Amanda took all of mine. And we were in Vegas for the World Series, and we're at the gym. The gym. Yes. Okay. Yeah. We're at the gym, and Amanda is wearing an Upswing shirt, and she's never met you before, and you just come up to her and you start going like this, like, and she's like, excuse me, sir. And you're just like, hey, Upswing, huh? And she's like, yeah, okay, excuse me. And she had no idea who you were.
I was getting blown off by someone in an Upswing shirt.
She's like, there's some weird guy over here who keeps pointing at me and pointing at my shirt and pointing back to his face and smiling. He's got this weird, ridiculous smile. And he's like, do you know this guy? And I was like, oh, Doug, what's up? She had no idea.
Confused. I do remember
she was wearing your company's shirt.
Well, it's not like we're Adidas. If you're wearing an Upswing shirt and you don't know who I am, that's a pretty unique group of people, right? I just thought it was 100% Stone.
That's something that could have come out of Trump's mouth right there. You don't know who I am. Wait, what you should start doing, would solve this problem, is you have the Upswing shirt, you got the king on the front, but then you take out the king's head, you put on Doug Polk's head.
No.
Maybe the Joker at this point, the Joker with Doug Polk's head. Then my girlfriend would know who you are.
Well, I think these are just the risks that we take,
It's
nothing's perfect. I don't think I could put we had a shirt that was a picture of me saying Bazam. I think we sold a total of one of those because it was me and I bought one and wore it on stream, and that was not. You don't want a shirt with my face in it. You want a shirt with something anything else or nothing.
Well, I think that the whole sleeveless shirts, the whole tank tops, that's like, who's really killing the tank top industry right now? Nobody.
Wow. Yeah, nobody.
I can't name Nike, Adidas, All Saints. Any of these guys do tank tops. This is your industry.
I was
now that you're retired from poker, even though you still run a poker podcast, and I thought you were going to make a little foray in politics there for a second, but
it was looking like it. But I decided that that's a really tough bridge to cross, because once you cross it, it's hard to go back. And I even seen it today. The chat's got to be thinking, what the hell is going on right now? These guys are talking about Trump, and they're talking about racism in America, and then they move that into tank tops. What do we got? What's the lineup today? The host needs to do a little better job on the topics. Jesus. But once you cross the politics bridge, you really kind of can't go back, because you are going to make some people really upset. And I think most of my takes are well reasoned, where if people disagree with me, they would understand what I'm saying. But there's a lot of the topics people say, Doug, you don't know what you're talking about. Shut up. No one cares. Two poker players talking about, I just saw that comment in here 30 minutes ago. Two poker players talking about politics. Guys, stick to what you know. Guess what, bro? We're 0.25 poker players combined at best.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Would your timing on the politics have been a little bit different had you successfully recalled that politician in the mayor of Vegas? Because that was an unsuccessful campaign, right? If that had been a successful campaign, do you think there would have been some momentum there? And things could have been different. It was an unsuccessful
recall, Kane, but not because we couldn't get the people. It was because we had a really tough decision with COVID, and we learned as we went through the fine print in the laws, the local laws, that it had to be in-person signatures. And we didn't want to, during COVID, during a pretty bad spike in COVID, go door to door to people that the average voter age, I think, was 81 or 82 years old. Right. And go to all of their doors and say, hey, sign this so that we can recall the mayor. We can't in good faith do that to old people. That's just, it's just too risky for them. They're if it was young people, then sure. But
I think so unlike COVID was back in the day, I think this is a good little transition here. I think we need to talk about what I perceive as an entire and complete moral or health panic surrounding COVID today, specifically regarding the Omicron variant. And I think in my opinion, it is inexplicable the amount of fear mongering coming out of our government surrounding COVID with what's going on today. I mean, the Omicron variant, there's been a total of fewer than 30 deaths worldwide at this point. We've had millions of people from Omicron specifically, right? Is that false?
I didn't know 30 total deaths. What about all so the COVID stats aren't filtered by Omicron versus Delta daily, right? On Google, if you just see COVID statistics.
Right.
So how are you getting that total number for Omicron?
This is just from obviously the resources I've looked into. I think there hasn't been one in the United States, to my understanding, that's been directly related to Omicron, right? And at this point, Omicron is seeming very much like a common cold, which in my opinion is encouraging, right? People are worried about Omicron. I think it's an encouraging sign, because what happens with viruses throughout history, right, is that they will become more contagious and less lethal over time, right?
Well,
and
sorry.
I've been saying for some time we're going to see this with COVID. We just don't know how long it's going to take, right? So, like right now, the common cold that we get is actually a variant of the Spanish flu, right? Which is still around. It's just become more or less benign, but it's become more contagious and less lethal over time. And the same thing, I believe, is going to happen with COVID. Now, the only way that wouldn't be the case, deductively speaking, that I could see that not being the case, is if this was some man-made, lab-created virus that has different qualities, different properties than most viruses. But we don't have evidence of that. And so far, I am encouraged by the fact that variants like Omicron, in my opinion, are much less lethal than older variants of COVID, right? And I'm not somebody who's sitting here and has been, kind of whistling past a graveyard regarding the issue of COVID. I moved to Alaska to avoid COVID when COVID was first a thing, because I didn't know anything about it. And I said, I believe that a global pandemic is probably the number one or number two behind AI existential risk that there is, right? And so I moved to Alaska because I didn't know how bad it was going to be. And it turned out it was less bad than I anticipated then, but still it was bad, right? I had some friends who were around my age, healthy people who got COVID. They had a bad case, you know. None of them had to go to the hospital, fortunately, but some of them were having trouble breathing and stuff like that. But now we're at a point where, in my opinion, COVID has gotten much more, the new cases, the new variants have evolved the way that we're expecting, where one should expect them to become less problematic. Yet we still have this panic from the United States government, from global governments, this fear-mongering. We have statements coming out of the White House that we're going to have a winter of severe illness and death for the unvaccinated. That is completely unfounded as it relates to Omicron, right? The whole statement was about the Omicron variant here. And in my opinion, there are two problems here. One is we are creating fear in a population where it's serving no purpose. And number two, and this is the even bigger problem, is it's extremely divisive. More so than, in my opinion, anything that I can remember politically in our time regarding race, regarding class, regarding any other thing that divides people. Right now, the divisive language coming from the very top of the White House about, oh, unvaccinated people are in this category and vaccinated people are in this category. And we have two classes of people. And if you look at just discourse on Twitter between the people who are vaccinated and people who are unvaccinated, I mean, it's insane. We're creating two classes of people where we simply don't need to.
A lot of things to say about that. I want to start with saying I agree with a lot of the general sentiment overall. A couple small notes that I want to just briefly mention. When there's only 30 confirmed deaths of Omicron, or the number that you just listed, case numbers have been spiking really high. Death numbers have not risen that much because it is so much weaker of a variant than these prior variants. And because of that, we should be treating it like that. And we're not. We're treating it like it's the same thing as the first wave. And we're at a significantly lower fatality rate now. It's much more viral, but it is a significantly lower fatality rate. And we need to be factoring that into our decisions. We can't treat any COVID variant the same, regardless of its potency, because then what happens if there's one that kills nobody? We're just still going to pretend it's the same. What if there was one that killed 1 out of 10 people? We're going to treat that the same. No, you have to look at how potent these are and how likely it is to actually kill people or have significant lasting impact on their lives. As far as the death rate for this variant specifically, while it is much lower, and we can tell that because the total case number is rising dramatically, yet the death rates are not, the death rates still have increased. So how do you factor that there's only 30 confirmed cases, or maybe that sentence is true, but certainly some people are dying from Omicron that are not being attributed here, or else why would there be rising deaths during this rise in cases, even if it's not proportional to some of the earlier waves?
Because Omicron's not the only variants of COVID. So, I mean, right now you have people dying of COVID who hadn't caught COVID previously, right? Who are catching old variants of COVID, perhaps the Delta variant or one of the original strains of COVID, who were dying from it, right? But it doesn't do us much good to pick apart the differences, right? The only point I was making regarding Omicron is that we should be encouraged that COVID is mutating to become less lethal and more contagious over time, right?
Agreed.
To your point, right now, we should be looking at the plurality of what's going on with COVID in general, and we should be making public policy based on that, right? And I think it is entirely inexcusable, given the data that we have, to have public policy that is essentially denying rights to people who are unvaccinated based on the data we have. The data is very clear that natural immunity is superior to vaccine-induced immunity, right? And nonetheless, based on Biden's executive order, which is now being challenged across our country, right? If I am an employee of a company that hires over 100 people and I contract COVID, and then it's next week I'm going to get fired if I don't then go get vaccinated against the advice of medical professionals, against the advice of my doctors, and I think that that's unconscionable. I'm one person who is vaccinated against what is best for my own medical situation. I have a family history of autoimmune disease, and I have a bad immune system. I have immunodeficiency, and for that reason, I had multiple doctors tell me it's worse for your health to get vaccinated. But I live in Puerto Rico, where you need to be either vaccinated or get tested for COVID weekly to go into restaurants. And in order to play the World Series of Poker, I had to be vaccinated. So I made a decision to get vaccinated based on my social life, right? That should, and based on my ability, to some degree, my career or my old career, right, to go play the World Series of Poker. That should never be the reason why people are making individual medical decisions.
Good points. And I also got vaccinated for similar reasons. I viewed it as sort of irrelevant. I think that as a younger, healthy person, it doesn't matter if I get the vaccine. It doesn't matter if I get COVID. I'm going to be overwhelmingly likely to be completely fine. And so I don't think it has much impact on me. However, not being vaccinated is going to play a serious role in preventing me from being able to do the things that I want to do. So I'm getting vaccinated purely to have the freedom to do what I want to. And maybe a little bit for other people, but not really. We can pretend it's for that. But really, it's so that I can have the freedom to go where I want and do what I want. Like, for example, we got married in Hawaii in November. Hawaii was still on just complete lockdown, trying to prevent anything. You had to get yourself QR coded because that's how you stop COVID. It's QR codes. You have to wear your mask anywhere you go. If you're by yourself, you better have your mask on inside. You have to have a COVID vax card to get into restaurants. We had basically, if we had guests and they weren't vaccinated, just don't come to my wedding. Just don't come. There's no point. You can't get into. You're not gonna be able to go into eat places. You're not gonna be able to do anything. Right? It's a complete shutdown. So that level of shutdown in November is pretty ridiculous and unnecessary in terms of what benefit you even get back from having that stage of a shutdown. I think that COVID has been it's interesting to see the faults of the system play out over the course of the last 2 years. And it's become so politicized. And it was from the start that I do believe at the beginning, pre-vaccine, and before we knew what was going to happen, I think that the left was way more on top of it in acknowledging this was happening. Let's try and prevent it as much as we can, and then wait for the vaccine. And flatten the curve was the phrase that got thrown around a lot. And I think that made a lot of sense compared to this is the flu argument, because it was clearly a lot more lethal than the flu. We can argue about how much more lethal, but it was clearly a lot more lethal than the flu, and we didn't know about long-term results from it. Then it started to reach this point where we started to get vaccinated, and then the arguments really shifted on each side. And it's funny because I feel like neither side budged at all. They both had the exact same positions, day 1 versus day 500. You need to do everything you possibly can. Don't leave your house, social distance, all this stuff. Or it's a scam. It's the flu. It doesn't exist. And then it just because the actual situation shifted, it went from the left is more right to the right is more right. Well, no one even really gave up any ground on their positions the entire time.
Well, it's funny. This conversation's kind of coming full circle, because the reason it played out the way it did, right, with Donald Trump at the helm of the administration when COVID began, right, was we know that Trump is motivated to stay in power, to get praise, right, and he doesn't care about facts, right, and that's the reason we saw the response from the White House that we did, right, to the extent that Trump could deny that this is a thing, right? Well, then he was dealing with a stock market that was down 25-30% in the course of a month, right? He didn't want that. He was dealing with re-election coming up, right? He didn't want that. And he has no problem lying through his teeth, right? But as a thought experiment, what do you think would have happened if we had Donald Trump and immediately he embraced the vaccines, right? He was the poster boy for vaccines, right? Let's just say that Donald Trump came out. Everything else about Trump is the same, right? The hatred for him throughout our country and the mainstream media, but he was the poster boy for vaccines. Do you think we'd see a different tact now from the current administration? Because I do. I think a lot of this is just political.
I have to think about that. I do think that the left way overvalues saving any person's anything. So I think that if death rates are going up, I just think that's going to call out to the left way more than the right. It's just it's more in their sort of in their ethos is to save human life. So I do think that there still would be. I actually don't. I don't think so. To be honest,
but that's not the ultimate motivation, though, Doug. Because look at what the left is pushing vaccines on children, on people who have a 0% chance of dying from COVID.
Yeah, it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Right. So it's not about the death. And this is where this, okay, so it's funny because this also ties into the whole Craig Wright thing. What a conspiracy theorist mind.
Come on, I thought we left that behind and we were being friends again.
Hey, Craig Wright is against these government mandates, and he's Satoshi, so listen to him.
Sometimes when you're right, you're wrong.
Listen, conspiracy theorists will take this situation, people on the right will take this situation and say, you see, look, this is just proof that our government is run by big pharmaceutical companies, for example, or an even more extreme position is the entire purpose of these policies is just government control. They want to get us in some sort of momentum where we're usurping our power to the government so they can take more and more of it over time, right? When in fact, I think it's oftentimes the explanation is much more simple. And I think in this case, the simple explanation is that the government reacted rationally by shutting down the economy in order to save lives, right? And I say rational in that we can debate whether or not it would be a better world or worse world on net if the economy were never shut down. I'm of the belief that we should not have shut down the economy. We should have acted like Sweden, which kept their economy open. Now, Sweden had more deaths, right? But I believe that you take that risk yourself, right? You are an individual, and if you are somebody who's high risk, then you take that risk yourself. You stay at home. I believe that that's more ethical than telling businesses that they have to close their doors, right? However, once we chose to shut down the economy, right, governments knew that they basically had a Sophie's choice. Either they were going to keep the economy shut down, and that was going to, obviously be unpopular because we're going to have people losing jobs, having less money, or they were going to leave the economy open, and these death numbers are going to be nuts, and people are going to hate, politicians because people are dying because, grandma died of COVID. So they chose to shut the economy down. And in order to get the economy back open as quickly and as expediently as possible, right, the government is basically forcing vaccines down people's throats, right? And they're doing that for political gain and also for economic gain, because the last thing that our government wants or foreign government wants is to go back down into lockdown. That's like the number one thing they're trying to avoid. And so instead, what we've seen is tremendous propaganda, a tremendous censorship. I mean, this is one of the most scary things to come out of this whole thing, from my perspective, is the amount of censorship around COVID and around COVID vaccines. I mean, we have Facebook groups of people who have negative post-vaccine effects that in a couple days have 40,000, 50,000 members, boom, just disband out of nowhere. If I go post on my Facebook wall about alternative treatments, about ivermectin, for example, as a treatment to COVID, it's not even going to show up on your wall. Same on Twitter for some time. I don't know if Twitter's corrected that, right? But the amount of censorship around this issue should scare the hell out of everybody.
It's tough because there is also tons of misinformation that, when it spreads, is hurtful to people. And with a lot of these alternative solutions, they don't help. And people put their faith in things that are complete fucking bullshit. And so I do think that platforms feel some degree of wanting to protect people against that. I'm sure a large part of it as well is they want to have the power over their own platform, for sure. But I do think that there are instances where the driving force here is, let's not let people that are gullible, and frankly, most people are quite gullible, get taken advantage of by fake bullshit as Facebook posts that your grandpa sends around.
But that's not really their motivation, because right now we have the mainstream and our administration pushing false information that is false, that everybody accepts.
Which information are you talking about?
For example, we have the Biden administration saying, you should get your children vaccinated because you don't want the risk of your child dying, right? This should be automatically flagged as a statement that is wrong for COVID, right?
Yeah,
this is
true.
We've had our researchers look into this, and this is just also we have people making statements about the efficacy of vaccinations versus natural immunity. At this point, the data is pretty clear on this issue. Natural immunity gives you superior immunity than vaccines do.
To hone on the children thing one more time, because I see people in the comments that don't understand this, and I see this misconception all over the place. Look up the total number of people under the age of 8 that have died from COVID. It is astronomically low. I want to say it's about 300 in the US, 250. It's something like that. And if we look at those individual cases, they're almost always in cases where there was something seriously wrong going on other than COVID. It's not they were a healthy child and then COVID came along and killed them. And if you're going to get to the point where you're going to just listen to the fear mongering, one person died, that's it kills everybody. You're not going to be able to think rationally and try and draw your own conclusions. On the other hand, for older people, it is clearly better if you do not have natural immunity and you are unvaccinated to get vaccinated. Not even close. It is not even remotely close. It is better to get vaccinated. So you can't have the argument against children getting vaccinated, which is a good argument, without having the same argument for older people. They need to get vaccinated because their chance of dying will be tremendously higher with some of these variants that aren't Omicron, or maybe even Omicron too. I don't know the rates. You are much better off getting the vaccine if you're middle-aged and older, or maybe you're unhealthy. If you're obese, for sure, you're much better off getting the vaccine than you are not getting the vaccine.
But circling back, do you see a problem here where, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they are pretending to be gatekeepers, right? In the traditional sense that you'd have CNN and MSNBC and these news organizations, it was required of them to monitor what they were saying for truthfulness. But in fact, we know that it's not about truthfulness. It's about which side of the political spectrum it's on, right? If it's pro-vaccine, it's going to go out there to everybody. And they're going to say that this is true and honest and factual. If it's anti-vaccine, maybe if it's a very, very strong argument and compelling, they'll let you post it, but it won't even come up on your feed, right? It won't even come up on your friend's feed. I think that this is a huge problem, right? For people who are critical thinkers like me, the choice to get the vaccine, again, it came back down to a social choice for me. But I was on the fence about it, right? And I think it's likely that if they had left up these Facebook groups of people with negative consequences of the vaccine, whatever, then I would have been more likely to want to get the vaccine. The problem is I didn't have access to the other side of the story, right? All I could do is if you Google right now, right, negative side effects of the COVID vaccine, you're going to find 0 articles about the actual negative side effects of the COVID vaccine, right? Maybe you'll find 1 or 2 things about VAERS, which is dramatically underreporting the negative side effects of the COVID vaccine. But I want to be able to take in all of that information so I could make a more informed decision. Yeah. Right. And in fact, in that case, it's entirely possible that I would have made that decision, not even on a basis of my social life, but maybe on a basis of public health. Right. If I said, oh, OK, of all the people on Facebook, there are 25,000 people who have had negative side effects, and their negative side effects is they have a little bit of lightheadedness or whatever. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get the vaccine because I'm less likely to infect grandma or whatever is going on. Right. But instead, in the absence of any of that information, to me, it's scary as hell for governments to come in, for our government to come in and influence private industry and them say, oh, no, you can't hear any of this stuff. I mean, then I have no way to gauge how safe this vaccine really is, right? And I can tell you in my circumstance, right, I think it is possible, but perhaps not likely that the vaccine is the cause of this. I get sick about once a year. And like I said, I have pretty bad immunity. My white blood cell count's pretty low. When I was a kid, it was much lower. And it's gotten better as I've gotten older. Since I've gotten my second shot, not counting the sickness you get right after the second shot, right? You basically get COVID symptoms the day of the second shot and the day afterwards. Not counting that.
Oh, I got that. Mine were so bad. Oh, and when I had the
really?
booster was just brutal. I had a horrible time. The first one wasn't that bad. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, mine was whatever. But then since then, it's been 13 weeks and I've gotten sick 3 times. So is it possible that the COVID vaccine has diminished my natural immunity? I've spoken to a number of doctors who think that that's possible. And
It's
possible.
It's possible. And now that you've said it, it's more likely true. Right?
But I don't listen.
If you hadn't said it, then it would be less true. But now it's a little different.
Well, you're absolutely right. Well, it's funny that there's actually something in terms of what people believe, right? The other day I was listening to Sam Harris podcast, and there are all these interesting studies about the more that somebody hears something, right, the more likely they are to believe it. And this is why we get people like Trump, right, basically just repeating over and over and over something that's just patently false, right? If he says it enough times, then other people believe it, and who knows? He probably even believes it himself if he says it enough times.
If you say it enough times, then anything can be true. Kane, I gotta say, normally we hard cap this at 2 hours. We've gone over 2 hours, and I didn't realize I was going to get so passionate talking about COVID and children getting vaccinated. But here we are. We came this far.
Yeah, I mean, you were very passionate about the Craig Wright discussion.
Oh, I mean that conversation is total nonsense. I'm going to talk to a bunch of people I know and just see where people are at. Maybe I've gotten the wrong.
It's funny. I was at dinner with Fee, and he had the exact same reaction as you. So
you know what the thing about Craig Wright is? I've had a really good history of being able to tell people's character, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect. No one is, obviously. But one of the reasons why I managed to more or less avoid scams is the moment I get sketch vibes, I'm out. And a lot of times it ends up being correct. And the moment that I saw Craig Wright, this guy is full of fucking shit. That was my instant reaction was full of shit. And then all of the shenanigans afterwards are all things that you would do if you were full of shit and not Satoshi. It all makes perfect sense. It doesn't make sense that you're Satoshi, because then what he's doing is it just doesn't make sense. He's not proving it, and he's trying to claim it. It doesn't make sense to do that. But if you're not Satoshi, it makes perfect sense, I think.
Maybe he's not motivated by the same things that you and I would be, Doug.
Okay, we don't have to go down that road. Kane, I want to say thank you for joining us. By the way, guys, if you are interested in short deck hold'em, Kane did a course on Upswing. You can head over there and check it out. Kane, any last things you want to say? Like maybe people want to follow you wherever you're at.
Go ahead and shoot me a follow. I'm on all social media. It's Kane Kalas on all of them. Obviously these days I'm doing the hedge fund thing is my main thing, but I'm also working as a side project on a music CD that'll be coming out in the next year, hopefully, something like that. A bunch of American standard Sinatra type stuff. So keep your eyes peeled for that as well, guys.
When you told me that, I said, wait, that's the wrong person. Oh, no, it's still Kane. Wow, what? We're doing a music album? That's so cool. And you told me because your dad had an amazing voice, and he was a singer as well, right? And it's sort of a tribute to your dad.
So my father was a sportscaster. He sang, for fun at local piano bars and stuff, but he loved music. And so when the Phillies would make the playoffs, he was known for singing Frank Sinatra's High Hopes. And it kind of started because the Phillies, I think it was the 93 Phillies, were not a great team. They made the playoffs, and it was kind of out of nowhere that they made a deep playoff run. And so this song, High Hopes, is just kind of about overcoming adversity and overcoming the odds. And so the name of the album is High Hopes as a tribute to Dad, and it has a bunch of the songs that he loved, a bunch of Sinatra stuff on there. And then I've sang my whole life. It's something I really enjoyed. Generally a little more classical genre, so this has been a little bit out of my comfort zone, but it's so different getting as a vocalist or even as somebody who does voiceovers, getting behind a microphone and singing or speaking there versus in an auditorium or in a concert hall, right? And it's just been a great experience for me because it's also kind of a tribute to the city of Philadelphia, right? Which is where I grew up. I'm using all local musicians. The studio's local, so I'm hoping to have a couple of potentially a couple local kind of bigger name people in music involved. So it's been great.
That's awesome. If you guys want to see Kane sing the national anthem, I believe every year, or at least some years, or for some time, Kane sings the opening game at the Phillies, the national anthem. And you got some pipes, man. You got some pipes in there.
Thanks, bro. I think you put one of those on one of your videos at one point.
I think I did. I just every time I see it, I'm amazed. it just feels so random when I first saw what am I looking at right now? I don't know. It's just it's cool. It's very cool.
Thanks, man.
All right, that's going to do it here. By the way, guys, thank you for tuning in. I know it was a little bit different. We've done a lot of poker stuff lately, but I like to cover lots of topics in the podcast and have interesting guests to come on and debate their points. So I hope no one was too offended today. And if you were, tough shit. Anyway, we'll be back again. Actually, I have a big announcement to make. Tomorrow, we have a surprise guest coming onto the podcast. Dan Bilzerian will be joining us. Plenty to talk about. Should be a fun one. 2 p.m. Central tomorrow. I'll see you guys there. Peace. Oh, and subscribe. I see a bunch of you guys aren't subscribed. Hit the subscribe button. Come on. We got lots of great content. I'll see you tomorrow.